Guys, Mrhappy here, and today I'm doing another Amdapor Keep guide. Now, I read a lot of people's feedback on the other guide, and I realized it wasn't really a fair depiction of the dungeon, showing us doing it in basically all item level 70, 80, and 90 gear. It was really just not a fair representation of the dungeon, so I'm doing another run, a full run with less gear in order to show you guys the entire dungeon. So in case you're wondering exactly what changes I made from the speedrun, if you've seen it at all, I'm playing healer, which is just a god-awful decision. You know, I'm not a great healer at all. We picked up a pug tank with Ifrit's Blade and mostly AF. Our monk is in mostly AF. The only person who's a bit overgeared, and a bit I use very loosely, is our black mage, and you'll see him pull aggro off the tank quite often just because he's well overgeared compared to the tank. Expect these pulls to still go a bit slower than they do with us. However, we have sacrificed enough DPS and gear in order to see all of the mechanics of all of the bosses, and we do all of the trash pulls for the sake of showing everyone the dungeon walkthrough. So I'm going to start talking about some of the trash mobs that we've been fighting here while I've been talking about the changes that I made to this video. So there are just 3 types of trash mobs before the first boss. The first one are the Dullahans, which are these big hulking guys in armor that walk back and forth. They patrol the dungeon pretty much, and you can fight them you can fight just one of them without having to fight anything near them. Just make a conscious effort to pull them individually and fight them off. They hit for about 1800 damage. They do a cleave move that hits for about 3,000 or 4,000 damage, and they can power up their auto attacks with a special attack towards their low HP. So just pull them individually and kill them, and you should be alright. Now we're gonna wipe here in a second, but I figured I could leave it in this just because, you know, we get past the fact that we wipe and we work together to clear the dungeon. Apparently our tank was lagging and it wasn't really that big of a deal. I knew we were going to be alright for the rest of the dungeon. Just be kind to one another while doing Amdapor Keep, and you should be able to overcome even lag and things like this. Unless it's completely unbearable lag and someone is not even attacking the monster, then it could be problematic, but we got past this, and we are going to complete the dungeon with this tank that we picked up. So, we're running back, and while we're running back, I'll talk about some of the other mobs that we fight. So, there are also Hypocrites, which are the most basic trash mob in this entire dungeon. All they do is one auto attack, and occasionally they do another attack in between their auto attacks that hits for slightly more damage. It's really not too bad. As long as your tank is able to hold them all safely, you can just DPS them down one at a time, and you should be alright. The final set of mobs are Lunatic Followers. Now, there are 2 types of Lunatic Followers. The first ones are Warriors, which just do warrior-like moves. They auto-attack, and they use Overpower. The other ones are Summoners that we will mark here. They're much smaller models. That's how you can recognize them. They also have a staff. And when you aggro these groups, they will begin to use Void Call. Should they succeed in casting it, they will summon a Soul Collector, which just does some additional damage. It's really not raid wiping. However, you can stun and silence Void Call, so target them first, burn them down, and interrupt Void Call. Now, as you can see, I'm running over here and I'm grabbing the first coffer of the dungeon. You actually don't need to fight any mobs to get this coffer, and it drops a demon brick every time. It's just a vanity pet that has a pretty funny look. You can run over and grab that anytime. Even if your party doesn't want to, you yourself can run over and grab that as long as you avoid the Dullahans and the Hippogriffs in the area. Just let your party know so they don't pull the first boss while you're running over there. Speaking of the first boss, here he is. This is a 3-phase fight. The first phase is this Lunatic Priest. The Lunatic Priest will only cast 3 spells. He'll cast Voidfire 3, which just does some pretty okay damage to whoever his target is. He'll cast Thunder, which also just does some moderate damage to his target, and he'll also cast Voidfire 2, which is very similar to the Voidfire 2 that you dealt with in Hawk Manor. It's just a ranged AoE that he'll do occasionally. Now at 50%, he will begin to use Void Call, the same move that the Lunatic Followers were using outside. However, his is non-interruptible, so your goal is to do as much damage to him as possible as soon as he starts casting it, so that when he summons the true boss of this encounter, that you don't really have to deal with the Lunatic Priest for that much longer. The true boss is the Psyche Player. Now, as you can see, we pulled the Psyche Player over to this corner of the room, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So the Psyche Player summons 2 types of adds. The first type of add he summons is this one, and he'll always summon this one first. This is just a golem that will do 2 moves. It'll do an auto attack, and it'll do a conal sort of box-like move that just does some frontal damage, does a lot. You don't want to get hit by it. It's called Rock Slide. You can stun it, and you can move out of the way of it, so just make sure not to get hit by it. Now, while we're waiting for the second ad to spawn, I'll talk about what the Psyche Player himself does. The Psyche Player himself has 3 moves. He's got Void Thunder 3, which will hit your tank or any target for significant damage. You can actually walk through, stun, or silence it though, so you can completely avoid the damage from it. He'll also cast Water, which basically replaces his basic attacks, and he'll cast it every few seconds. And he'll also cast Mind Melt, which just does AoE damage to the party. Again, can be silenced or stunned. After he summons the first golem, after a short period, he'll summon the second golem, which you just saw. The second golem also auto-attacks like the first one. However, instead of using Rock Slide, the conal move that the first one did, this one uses Obliterate, which is just an AoE damage, very similar to Mind Melt. In fact, it does very similar damage to Mind Melt as well. You can stun it as well, or you can just heal through it. Make sure to just get your DPS off of the boss and kill those ads when they spawn. Now, 50%, the Psyche Player will summon a giant golem in the center of the room, which will walk back and forth and use a giant version of Obliterate. Should this hit anybody, it will pretty much instantly kill them, and there are a few ways to counter this mechanic. Either way, I recommend pulling the boss towards the edge of the room. As you can see here, we pulled him towards the northwest side of the room, and this allows us to do one of two things. We can either hide behind the tree and the pillar that are right there next to us. You can use those to create a line of sight effect between the boss and yourself, so that you can completely avoid the move. Also, you can hide in that corner. If you are close enough to the wall, then the AoE won't hit you, so you can always hug the wall to avoid the damage as well. After that, the boss will keep summoning the ads from phase 1, and you just have to take care of them and kill the boss in a timely manner while making sure to avoid being hit by the giant ad. So after that, we're now onto the trash between Boss 1 and Boss 2 of Amdapor Keep. Now, one thing that I didn't mention in the first part of the dungeon is that there are actually key mobs between each part that you must kill in order to get to the next part of the dungeon. So the key mobs in the first part were just the Lunatic Followers right outside the gate, so it's really not necessary to mention them. However, these Votoriga Sleepers are actually the key mobs to get to the second boss. Now, these bosses were specifically implemented to prevent speedrunning, so that is their entire purpose, and, well, they were actually in the dungeon previously, most of them were at least. However, they are now required to be killed in order to progress on with the dungeon. So every time you approach a room with a set of gargoyle statues, a few of them will pop up and become the Votoriga Sleepers. There are 4 total rooms of these, so you just have to make sure to pull them separately from any other mobs in the dungeon. You can aggro these enemies and run out of the room before anything else aggroes in order to just have to fight the Votoriga Sleepers. The Votoriga Sleepers don't do anything special. They very similar to the Hypocrites, just do an auto attack and an occasional attack between those. So other than the Votoriga Sleepers, you still have to deal with Dullahands, and there are 2 more trash enemies that you have to deal with. One are Taurus type enemies called Brontotors. They do some pretty big damage to the tank, but there's usually only 1 or 2 of them per pull, and they don't have much HP, so you can kill them as if you would kill any other regular trash mob. The other mob are Hound Lights, and these do cast somewhat powerful thunder spells on their main target. I do recommend taking out the Brontotor first and the Hound Lights second. However, you can adjust this strategy to your party, whichever you want to kill first. They all do approximately the same damage. You'll be fine no matter which one that you target first. So just as a tank, let the party know which enemy you're going to be targeting first, and you should be all right. So we're now moving on to the third set of Votoriga Sleepers, and I actually didn't get to mention this, but we did open a treasure coffer in the previous room, the second room where you deal with the Votoriga Sleepers. It's actually a treasure coffer in the far corner. It's actually in the far south corner, I believe, of the room, and it always gives you a piece of jewelry. Now, this piece of jewelry, it could be anything. It could be tank jewelry, it could be DPS jewelry, healer jewelry, anything pretty much. The only thing it can't be is a wrist piece, so you can get earrings, necklaces, and rings from that chest. It's the only dungeon in the whole chest that gives you an accessory, so you really need to do this dungeon a lot if you want to collect all those accessories for your job. Now, as you can see, we moved past here, and I also got a third treasure coffer, which you just saw as well before this, and that just gives you Allegan bronze pieces, about 700 gil worth, I believe, to 2 different people. You can open that if you want to, maybe pay for your repair bills for here, but just don't expect to get rich off of it. So we just killed the final set of Votoriga Sleepers, as you can see, and we're coming up to the door to the second boss of the dungeon. There are a few trash pulls here, and there are Dullahands wandering back and forth, so again, proceed cautiously. Our tank here attempts to skip some of the enemies right before the second boss. I don't recommend doing this every time unless your party is very aware of the paths that you have to take. I would recommend just being very straightforward and killing all of the trash on the way here. The only trash that is more easily skipped is the trash right before this, which you saw us skip as well. Again, there's nothing really special to say about this trash. It's just Dullahands, Brontotors, and Hound Lights. Take care of it as you will, and you will soon be to the second boss, the Demon Wall, which we are entering right here. By the way, I'm sorry for casting Lustrate on myself by accident a ton of times. I replaced my Ruin button with Lustrate, and I've done it so many times. So this is the second boss. This is the Demon Wall. Now, the Demon Wall is somewhat of a DPS check, but mostly it's a control and attention check. You don't have to kill this boss particularly quickly. The quicker you kill him, however, the less mechanics you will have to deal with, and he does have significantly less health than the previous boss. So when you aggro the Demon Wall, you're going to have to worry about a few things. One, you can fall off of the side of this bridge, and that'll come through with a mechanic later. He'll also do some damage to random targets every few seconds. It's just a few hundred damage. It shouldn't be too hard to heal up. And starting the fight with Stone Skin Protect, and in the case of a Scholar Succor, will significantly reduce the amount of damage that you have to heal. The other move that he does is Murder Hole, which are these, as you can see, these lines of darkness that appear. He'll always do one in the center, then two on the outside, then nothing for a few seconds, then one in the center, two on the outside, nothing for a few seconds, and then after the second set of Murder Holes, he will always use Repel. Repel knocks you back from wherever you are as long as you take damage. This can knock you off of the edge of the arena if you're not standing in the center of the bridge. So after the second set of Murder Holes, you always want to be standing in the center of the bridge. Now after that, he moves forward a little bit and the fight continues as it did normally when the fight first started. You have a little bit less room horizontally to deal, or vertically to deal with, but horizontally you still have about the same amount of space. After two more Murder Holes, he will repel again. Now this is where most people have trouble with the fight, and there are a few different ways to handle this part of the fight. If you have a Black Mage or a Summoner, the Black Mage or the Summoner can use the Tier 1 Limit Break to do as much damage to the boss as well as the two new adds that have spawned for this part. It's simply two flies that will deal some single target damage to whoever, well, their target is. Or they can also do a move which you just saw get interrupted right there. It's a move that basically causes them to do some AoE damage, about 1,000 worth, and it will paralyze any targets hit. You can stun and you can silence it, so I highly recommend that if you see it coming, that you stun and silence it. Take care of the two adds and then get back on the boss. If you have enough DPS, you may be able to burn the boss down. This is really up to your individual party and party makeup. If you don't have a Black Mage or a Summoner, I highly recommend limit breaking one of the adds to kill them as soon as possible, then kill the other add, then move back onto the boss. The only other thing you're going to have to worry about in this part of the phase is that there's now Void Pitch in the very back of the room, meaning you have much less room to move around. However, you still have about 2 or 3 pushes before the Demon Wall will actually push you to a point where you're stuck in the Void Pitch, so you actually still have plenty of time to DPS the boss down at this point as long as you can stay alive. He will still do Murder Holes, and he will still target random party members to deal damage to them every few seconds. So once you take care of the ads, just get back on the boss, treat him like you did in the first couple of phases, the first couple of pushbacks. You should be alright. Still be looking out for Repel every 2 sets of Murder Holes, however. So after that, you're going to come to the trash between the second and third boss. Now this trash is again nothing too spectacular, but there is one thing that you have to remember. There are a new set of key mobs that you must kill in order to open the final boss room. These enemies are succubi. There's a total of 3 succubi in this hallway up on the upper part of Amdapor Keep, and they are going to annoy you immensely. Now, the 3 of them are at regular intervals in the dungeon, and each one of them likes to cast Void Fire 2 at a random party member. Now, as you can see right there, there's really nothing you can do. Even before you pull them, before you aggro them, they will shoot these moves at you, and it does quite a bit of damage, so you're just going to have to pay attention and avoid them. Now, similar with the Dullahans, they are separate to all of the trash packs in the room, so you can actually pull the succubi by themselves without aggroing anything else. As you just saw us do there, I pulled it from over the side of the wall, and it came all the way around, ignored all the trash packs, and we just fought that and the Dullahan that Celine aggroed, which was my fault. Other than that, there are 2 new types of ads that you're going to have to deal with. Technically 3, depending on how you performed on the Lunatic Followers before. The first one are Shmelenkos. Shmelenkos will simply auto-attack and occasionally do an AoE Paralyze move. There's really nothing too special about this. I'd recommend killing them first, however. The other types of enemies are Hound Lights again, as well as Soul Collectors. Now, Soul Collectors are the enemies that would have spawned if you did not kill the Summoner Lunatic Followers before. So, they really don't do anything special. They are very similar to the Hypocrites and the Vodarigas in their nature. They just do some single target damage. Occasionally, they do a conal move that doesn't really do a lot of damage. You shouldn't really have too much of a problem, but the kill order should always be, despite this poll that I'm looking at right now, should be Shmelenkos, Hound Lights, and then Soul Collectors. Hound Lights really do more damage than the Soul Collectors in my opinion. But again, you can adjust this completely to your team. Maybe your team wants to do it differently. As long as you're all on the same page, it doesn't really matter that much. So as you can see, this is the final pull before the 2 Dullahans, before the boss room, and has 4 enemies. This is really the hardest pull of the entire dungeon, just because the Succubi does quite a bit of damage, as well as Succubus. It's just 1 at this point. And then there's 2 Hound Lights and a Soul Collector. I recommend killing the Succubus first, then killing the Hound Lights, then killing the Soul Collector. However, we don't do it that way. Just the tank marked it, so we followed his marks. As long as you're all on the same page, you shouldn't have any problems with this part of the dungeon. After you kill the 3rd Succubus, the door to the final boss room will open up. However, there are still 2 Dullahans guarding it, as you can see, walking back and forth right here. So just dispose of them one at a time, as you have been, and congratulations, you're on the last boss of the dungeon. Hopefully, most of this dungeon walkthrough was a bit more beneficial than my last one. I made sure that we went through as many of the trash packs as we could, and I did ask to make sure I could get all the chests in the dungeon that were at least the important ones: the Demon Brick, the Loot, and the 7 bronze pieces, the ones that are very immediately in your way. So this is the final boss of the dungeon. His name is Anatoboga, I believe it is. He's a dragon, and he has a few interesting moves. But the first and most important thing is the positioning of the boss. Now, I've seen plenty of different strategies for this boss, and I like to recommend this one. And I did recommend this in the speedrun video as well. We're actually showing this tank how to do it right now. So what you do is, where the monk is standing right now and where the paladin is going, you actually stand there and pull the boss with shield lob or tomahawk from there. Once the boss comes over to the wall, you then spin him around so that his tail is facing the wall. This gives you the most room to move around in the later phases of the fight. Now, after the pull, I'll begin mentioning some of the different strategies that you can use to handle the rest of the fight, but for the most part, it becomes a tank and spank with just one very clever mechanic and some ad management that doesn't even really require a tank, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem with it. So our tank here, very willing to learn. I was very impressed. He very openly said, some people have told me my position could be better. Do you guys have any recommendations? We showed him, and this is his first time trying it, so we took it easy on him. We made sure we gave him time before we really started DPSing. He took some damage here, and now he's working on turning it around. So the first mechanic you'll have to deal with are tail swipes, and this is why we actually have the tail facing the wall, is so we don't have to deal with the tail swipes at all. So now that he's faced the boss, for the most part, he got the position right, and, you know, there's not really much change that needs to be done here. So now there's just a few mechanics that you have to deal with. The boss does have a cleave move and an auto attack, as well as a move called Rotten Breath. Rotten Breath simply does about a few K damage and puts a healing debuff on the target. Healers, you're going to need to make sure to dispel this off the tank as soon as possible before you continue healing them. The next move you have to deal with is Imminent Catastrophe, which the boss will do at regular timed intervals. Basically, it summons an orb in the center of the room, which will explode outward, pretty much instantly killing anybody but a tank. The tank shouldn't be eating these, but our tank was a bit afraid of dealing some cleave damage to the rest of the party. So he held it still, and I just healed him through it, which was perfectly okay. He did fine, in my opinion. And after Imminent Catastrophe, and in order to avoid Imminent Catastrophe, there are 4 statues around the room, each of a gargoyle. And you can hide behind them to create a line of sight, similar to how you did the pillars on the first boss. And you can use those to completely avoid the damage. After he does Imminent Catastrophe, one of these statues will always turn into a gargoyle ad. This ad does a small AoE ability that really doesn't do a lot of damage, and the ad itself has very little HP. The tank does not need to pick up this ad. Both of your damage dealers just shift to the ad, kill it, stun it, get back onto the boss. He'll continue using tail swipes, he'll continue using Rotten Breath, and he will continue to use Imminent Catastrophe at regular intervals. One little hint for reducing tank damage on this fight: whenever you see Rotten Breath come out, damage dealers, that is usually the best time to trigger the tail swipe. When you run behind the boss, trigger the tail swipe and run out of it, it actually reduces the amount of damage that the tank takes, and it's very useful for new parties learning how to do this. So he does Imminent Catastrophe a second time, and now the second statue has become a gargoyle. Keep in mind that these gargoyles becoming statues are regularized. I think that's a word. It'll always be the southwest gargoyle, then the southeast gargoyle, or no, the north, yeah, no, the southwest, and then the northeast, and then it should be the southwest and then the northeast. So that'll always be regularized. That's not a word. Let's just pretend it is. So after the second imminent catastrophe, the boss will begin tethering a random party member other than the tank. This tether, after a few seconds, will summon an orb on the party member that it is connected to, and this will drop an orb that will do about 600, 700 AoE damage every few seconds. He'll drop 2 of these orbs every time he does imminent catastrophe. However, at this point, you really want the boss to be as low as possible. If you have a tier 2 limit break and a single target DPS, I highly recommend, as we just did, that you use it on the boss to try and finish him. He will do imminent catastrophe again, and if you are not quick enough killing the boss, you can run out of imminent catastrophes, or you can run out of statues to hide behind imminent catastrophe. So it's a light DPS check, but you really shouldn't have too many problems with this. And congratulations, you've just beat Amdapor Keep. Have fun running this along with Castrum Meridianum for a pretty long time to get all of your Dark Light. If you enjoyed this video, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV information. Also, feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. You can ask me questions there, make video recommendations. I really do appreciate all of those sort of activities. And also, just feel free to, you know, ask me a few questions, get to know me a little bit. I don't mind any questions that you might have to ask. You can also ask me on YouTube itself, but with Google+, YouTube's become a lot more problematic to answer messages on just because it's not nearly as visible anymore. So I recommend Facebook or Twitter. But anyway, guys, I hope this made up for the Amdapor speedrun video that I did. I'm going to properly rename that a speedrun and rename this non-speedrun. Hopefully that helps clear up some of the confusion. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel. And until next time, take care.